Zack Snyder's Justice League comes out this week, and for months now I've been teasing a video going into the history of the DCEU, talking about how it happened, why it is the way it is, and what it could have been along the way. Unfortunately, that won't happen, because instead of making one video, I've elected to make a 3-part series instead, with this part covering a version of the DCEU that we've never seen, but one that we came very close to seeing. That being what I refer to as the Mortalverse, a universe that would have begun with the unmade George Miller film Justice League Mortal. It was a pretty promising start to the DCEU, but what went wrong? Why did it take an extra 8 years for a Justice League movie to hit screens? And how come this promising plan eventually became the lackluster DC Extended Universe that we have today? Well, we'll get into that, but right now let's just talk about how the DC Extended Universe came to be. The first hint of a DC Cinematic Universe was happening in the late 90s, but it wasn't really a cinematic universe as we know it, of a long-form narrative being planned out across multiple films in multiple franchises. In the late 90s, Tim Burton was assigned to direct a Superman reboot called Superman Lives, and there were actually plans for this movie to take place in the same universe as the 90s Batman movies. In Kevin Smith's draft of the screenplay, Batman would show up as Superman's funeral. However, later interviews with Michael Keaton show that plans for Batman's inclusion in the movie changed with later drafts. When asked if he was going to reprise his role of Batman in the movie, Keaton replied with, "Not exactly," leading people to believe that maybe Bruce Wayne would have a role in the movie, but would it be Batman? This is unconfirmed. And obviously, Superman Lives never ended up happening. Fast forwarding to 2002, at this point, Warner Bros. Was developing a handful of DC movies. The 3 they were working on the most actively were Superman the Man of Steel, also known by fans as Superman Flyby, a Superman reboot written by J.J. Abrams, Batman Year One, a Batman reboot written by Darren Aronofsky and Frank Miller and directed by Aronofsky, which would have reinvented the character, and Batman vs. Superman, written by Akiva Goldsman. These movies were all being made by different people and had different goals and angles on their characters, so they weren't made with the intention of being in the same universe. But it's hard to believe that with a Superman reboot intended to start a franchise, a Batman reboot, and a Batman and Superman team-up all in development with WB at the same time, it is kind of hard to believe that WB wasn't seeing Batman vs. Superman as a potential team-up between the two franchises. But with that being said, if you look into what each movie was, their continuities wouldn't have matched up. With a rewrite, you could probably fit Flyby into the team-up, but Batman Year One was a Batman origin that reinvented the character, and Batman vs. Superman had a more Dark Knight Returns Batman right from the comics. None of these movies ever got made though. Batman Year One was too out there for WB, so they ended up doing other Batman projects instead. Batman vs. Superman was sidelined for Superman Flyby, and Superman Flyby evolved into Superman Returns once Bryan Singer signed on as director. But the first time a true cinematic universe was brought up was in 2007. With Marvel beginning production on the first 2 movies of their planned cinematic universe, DC decided they would start their own. Not only that, but they would beat Marvel to the punch on a big crossover movie. In February 2007, writing duo Kieran and Michelle Mulroney were hired by Warner Bros. To write a Justice League movie, which would take the name Justice League Mortal. The plan was for production to start in early 2008 and have it released in mid-2009, beating Marvel's Avengers movie by a few years. The movie would have featured the Justice League already formed, with Maxwell Lord as the villain. There were plans at one point for Brandon Routh to play Superman and Christian Bale to play Batman, looping Batman Begins, Superman Returns, and The Dark Knight into the Mortalverse, though these quickly disappeared. Superman Returns didn't do well enough to warrant a sequel, so it was a better idea to recast and start a new franchise after Justice League Mortal. As you may expect, no one associated with the Dark Knight movies wanted it to be in the Mortalverse, so they recast. Thus, Justice League Mortal was now the first movie in the Mortalverse. Some people claim it would be an unwise decision to start a DC cinematic universe with a Justice League movie instead of slowly building up each character in solo movies before teaming them up, but I disagree. Starting with Justice League can work, especially with DC. When Marvel built their universe, no one knew about most of their characters, so it was important to introduce each of them to the world. However, people know the DC characters, and even the ones that are even remotely obscure are pretty easy to understand on a surface level. Everyone knows Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, etc. And it's not like they had to show the origins of each character and how the League formed in the movie. The MCU used the approach of starting in a world where superheroes don't exist. Iron Man was the first superhero, or at least he was the first recent public superhero. So having a lived-in universe for DC could have been refreshing. To show you how invested DC was in this universe, at the time that the Mulroneys were hired to write Justice League Mortal, David S. Goyer had been writing a Flash solo movie for some time that wouldn't exactly fit in the Mortalverse. You'd expect one of the scripts to be rewritten, especially considering David S. Goyer co-wrote Batman Begins. But no, David S. Goyer left over creative differences and new writers were assigned to write a Flash movie that would work in the Mortalverse. George Miller signed on to direct and much of pre-production was done. Most of the principal cast was locked in. Armie Hammer was cast as Batman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, DJ Catrona as Superman, Adam Brody as The Flash, Hugh Keys-Byrne as Martian Manhunter, Teresa Palmer as Talia al Ghul, Zoe Kazan as Iris Allen, Santiago Cabrera as Aquaman, Jay Baruchel as Maxwell Lord, Common as the Jon Stewart Green Lantern, and Anton Yelkin as Wally West. Everything fell apart as filming kept getting pushed back for a few reasons. Originally, filming would have taken place in Australia, but because of tax reasons, WB wanted to film in Canada instead. But Miller kept fighting to film in Australia. WB also wanted the script to be revised, but it couldn't due to the writer's strike happening at the time. So eventually, WB elected to push back a Justice League movie and do solo movies first instead. At one point, the 2011 Green Lantern movie would have been the first movie in the DCEU, but after it flopped, it wasn't worth making sequels, so therefore it wasn't worth being the start of their universe. But there was new hope on the horizon. In 2013, after the Dark Knight trilogy was done, a Superman reboot was coming. With David S. Goyer as the main creative force behind the project, Christopher Nolan executive producing, and Zack Snyder directing, with the mission statement of the movie being to do to Superman what Batman Begins did to Batman, it seemed like the perfect movie to start their universe. And that's where we stop for today. Come back tomorrow for part 2, where I talk about the birth and death of the Snyderverse and how it was a huge but somewhat understandable mistake by WB to cancel it. Don't forget to subscribe for daily videos on the franchise you love, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.